So today, as I was looking for the charger for my watch, I came across my grandfather's watch in my sock drawer at the very bottom underneath the socks. And I was looking at this watch and I decided to bring it today because it's illustrative of what I want to talk about today. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this watch. It works. I think it works. It's one of those ones that works by motion. So that's why it wasn't working this morning until I shook it. And now it's working by motion. It's telling you the time. The time is accurate. The time is accurate. But then I don't wear this watch every day. This is a great foundation because it tells me the time and it's still accurate to the time. But this watch, although I have to charge it every 24 hours, this watch, if you looked at the face of the watch, looks very much similar in that it's got 12 through 11 in the circle that we're used to. It's got hands that move around. It's the same thing, it functions. But this is so much better. And I'll tell you why this is so much better. It tracks my sleep. It tracks my walking. When I go for a walk, it tells me how many steps I've taken. It tells me different heart and different health metrics. It's just, it's this watch, but it's just better. Jesus, when he came to show us the way of his kingdom, he did not come to erase the Old Testament. He didn't come to say, throw your old watches away. He came to say, I have a better way. I have a better version of what you've been doing. So he didn't come and throw away the law, for example. He came and fulfilled the law. That's a little bit of a tangent, and we're going to talk today about the kingdom is not nearly believed. It's not just something we do out of rote, but it's something that we live out, that we're invited to live out. Last week we discovered that as soon as Peter recognized Jesus as the Christ, Jesus said, right. Now let me tell you the next steps. And he started talking about going to Jerusalem and talking about dying, and they were confused. But remember, we've already established that Jesus is on a mission here. He's following through his mission. He's not going to be stopped in his mission. So right after that admission, here we go. Instead of rushing straight to the cross, which might say, oh, Jesus is leading us straight to the cross. Let's go to the cross. Luke parks the story a little bit, and he gives us 10 chapters filled with teaching, parables, encounters, conversations. Why does he do this? Well, I would suggest that before Jesus dies for us, he wants to teach us what it looks like and feels like to live with him. These chapters show us that life in the kingdom looks like and what it is we can expect. And it's upside down to the way that things only did. This only functions in one way. This functions in hundreds of ways. So it's upside down. It's a little bit of He's being disruptive to the way that things used to be, but he's not entirely changing the way certain things function. In Luke chapter 10, we see a story of Jesus is telling a parable. Now, a parable is an earthly story that we can relate to, but it has a heavenly meaning. So an earthly story that we can relate to, it makes sense to us. We go, oh yeah, okay. I see that, but it's got a deeper meaning to the story. And so that's how Jesus talked a lot. in parables. And he tells us of a man who's beaten and left for dead. This man is a traveler. He's going from one place to another, and he comes across an unfortunate incident where he meets up with some robbers, and they beat him and they leave him for dead and take his stuff with him, and he's left destitute. And the priest comes by, religion comes by, and doesn't do anything for the man. A Levite, who was one of the most esteemed orders of priests in the Jewish religion and Judaism, he came by, and again, he could offer him nothing. He did nothing for him. And then an outsider, a Samaritan, and we won't go into the history, just enough to say that Samaria was adjacent to Jerusalem, and the Samaritans and good Jewish people didn't get along. They conflicted. There's a lot of history as to why that happens, but Jesus recounts that the Samaritan stopped, got off his beast, helped the gentleman, bound up his wounds, paid the cost for him, showed mercy, and then Jesus says to his audience, after he's finished telling the story, he turns to his audience and says, I want you to go, and I want you to do the same thing. Do likewise. In the kingdom, love crosses boundaries. See, to the Jewish audience listening to that parable, they would go, a Samaritan? Ooh, gross. Like, why would you choose to... I was with you until that point in the story. Yep, religion did nothing for the man. Following after Judaism did nothing for the man. I got you, but a Samaritan. We are going to see today, as we celebrate Palm Sunday, that even when Jesus came, he wasn't recognized. Light came into the world, he wasn't recognized as that. And we'll see the people, the Jewish audience, the crowd, turn against Jesus, and we'll wonder why that is. But Jesus said the light has come into the world, and the world didn't recognize me. Being a neighbor is not about proximity, it's about compassion. And then in Luke chapter 10, a little further on down the chapter, we know the story really well about Mary and Martha. How that Martha is really busy and Mary is present at the feet of Jesus, and she's listening, and Martha complains, and Jesus said she's doing what Marion read it for us today. She's doing what is the better of the two. She's at my feet listening as I am unfolding truth to her. So activity is not the same as devotion. I want to say that again. Activity is not the same as devotion. And let that challenge us for a second. So doing things out of rote and doing things because that's the way I know how to do certain things isn't always the best way. Like our faith isn't based on works. I was talking to my mom this a couple of days ago, and she said something. I won't tell you what she said, but she said something, and I said, wow. When I walked away from the conversation, I thought, wow, that really sounded like my mom was saying if she didn't do a certain thing, if she didn't say a certain thing and look a certain way, that God was going to suddenly that she was going to be distasteful to God. And that's not the way it is at all. So Jesus says to Martha, don't worry about it. Mary has chosen the better portion. She's chosen the better thing is to be with me and to hear what I'm talking about, the new watch, the new way. And she is just, it's okay for you to be occupied. That's fine. But don't look down on Mary because of what she's doing. And then Jesus is still going, and he's telling us now about humility is going to be over self-righteousness. He tells us about a prayer. He tells us another story. This could actually be true, or like a parable with a meaning, or it could be actually an observation that Jesus has made. We don't quite know. But he tells about a Pharisee and a tax collector. Now the tax collector, if you remember from last week, when Jesus called Levi was a tax collector, and he was a turncoat. He was a sellout to Rome. He was collecting taxes for Rome, same as Zacchaeus that we sang about this morning. These are people that would be looked down on by the regular Jewish community as being the lowest of the low, because they've sold out. They're collecting taxes for an oppressing regime that's dominating our country. That right now they've sold out to the Romans. So we have in this story a Pharisee, and people are going in the audience. They're going, "Oh, Pharisee! Oh yeah, that's a top-notch person. That's a studied individual. That's a person who is well acquainted with Judaism and the faith." And then we've got the lowest of the low, a tax collector. And so they're thinking, "Wow, this is going to be a good story." But Jesus tells it the way he tells it. The Pharisee is off in the corner, and he's like, "Oh man, look at me. God, look at me. Look at all the things that I've done. Look at all the things that I do for you, that I do in your name." And then he goes, "And at least I'm not like this guy." And the audacity of saying that to God, "At least I'm not like this guy." And we hear that Jesus tells us the tax collector, on the other hand, he won't even enter the door of he's hiding out in the corner. He's ashamed of himself. He knows what people think of him. He's not happy maybe in his occupation, and he is destitute, and he calls out to God for mercy. And that's the person that Jesus actually pulls out in the story. So it's not the old watch would say, "This is great. Look at this Pharisee. Oh yeah, he's these guys, they used to wear things on their garments so bells would ring and stuff like that, so people would know they were coming to pray, all about flashiness and about self." But Jesus turns the table, and he wants to pull out, and he wants to exalt and talk about this man who shows a lot of humility. And then, as we talked about before a couple of weeks ago, grace seeks out the lost. Jesus tells another 3 parables, a parable with 3 parts. He talks about a lost sheep, a lost coin, a lost son. And we're all probably really familiar with those stories from Sunday school as well, how that they escalate, and we see that the father in the last story, the widow searches for the coin, the shepherd searches for that lost sheep, and the last part of this parable, the father is overjoyed that his son who was lost, who ran away into a far country, has come back to himself. And he runs, he embraces, he restores. And this, I suggest to you, is grace. It's not earned, it's not deserved, it's not given. It's not based on any merit that we see. But we see the older brother here standing outside pouting and saying to his dad, "That's not fair. You killed a fatted calf for him. He's a rebel. You gave him a golden ring for his finger. He's a rebel. You clothed him in rich garments. He's a rebel, Dad." And trying to draw his dad's attention to what his brother was had done, taken the inheritance before time, had gone out, wasted it. He wanted to draw his and keep his dad's attention on that. But we notice in the story that God, Jesus here telling the story is saying that God's not interested in our past. Jesus is going to go to the cross very shortly, and he's going to die, and he's going to shed his blood for our sins. And after that, none of the past matters at all. We have a great hope, a fantastic hope, that if you put your faith and trust in Jesus and his work alone, and that is what brings us salvation. We don't have to worry about our past. We have an accuser, though, who will try to remember us, who will try to remind us about our past. I don't remember the verse, but I remember my dad telling a story. He loved to tell stories, and he told a story once of an elderly lady who came to Christ, and she got saved. But at nighttime, she went into her bed, she would hear what she envisioned were a voice from under her bed accusing her, yeah, but you can't actually be in relationship with Jesus. Do you remember back in 1943? Do you remember that? I don't think God can forgive that. And then this went on for nights and nights and nights, and she went to her minister or friend, and she told them what was going on, that she was having these recurring dreams, and they were keeping her up at night. And her friend or minister brought her to a Bible verse that said that once we're in God's hands, that we can never be released, and other verses that assured her of her salvation, that it could never be lost. So she went home and she opened up her Bible to the verse that she wanted, the verse that she had memorized. She opened it, and then she went to sleep. And she tried to go to sleep, and it happened again. So she rolled over, she put the Bible down and stuck it under the bed and put her finger on the verse and said, "Read that." And she slept soundly. From then on goes the story. We sang about Zacchaeus today, one of my favorite stories. I have a couple of, if you hear me mention some anecdotes about life in the Caribbean, it was not a life on a resort at all. It was a life as a missionary's child. And I remember his name was John Honor. And John had a very thick accent. And John was speaking about Zacchaeus one night. And I'll tell you what he said. But Zacchaeus is a tax collector. He's wealthy. We know why he was wealthy. He was a fraudster. And he was also despised. He was hated. He was like Levi. He was hated. Jesus comes to town. And another barrier that Zacchaeus had, I was at a men's breakfast yesterday, and one of the taller people like myself, called out a little short man and told him to get in the front of the picture. I was like, oh dear. Anyway, Zacchaeus he was short in stature. And he wanted to see Jesus. We know the story. He wanted to see Jesus, and Jesus was coming to town. And he probably wasn't able to stand with the rest of the people anyway, probably because they looked down at him. Zacchaeus, get out of the way. Go somewhere else, because they all knew who he was as a tax collector. So in any event, he runs down the street and he climbs a tree and he gets up there because he wants to see Jesus. And John Honor said he climbed and he was trying to say sycamore. Sycamore is the word, right? But in John's thick St. Lucian accent, he said he climbed a sycamore tree, and it sounded in my mind like seek him more. He's climbed the sycamore tree. And I've always remembered that for a lot of years now. John's pronunciation defined what Zacchaeus was doing that day. He climbed a tree to seek him more. Jesus comes by and stops right under the tree. Stops right under the tree. And he invites him to come down. He said, I must stay at your house today. He initiates this conversation, but Zacchaeus responds. He responds, and as we sang today, he said, half the goods I give to my poor, I give to the poor, but on top of that, I'm going to restore 4 times what I stole from folks. So he's admitting and repenting. A funny aside, Michelle, whenever I heard that song, we used to sing it in the Old English, like the King James, so there was a "the" in there. Anyway, I used to think as a kid that it was, I'm coming to your house for tea. And so Jesus goes over to this man's house. He wants to show him grace, and he wants to show him mercy. And it wasn't the fact that that Zacchaeus was offering to do these things that found him favor in the sight of Jesus, but Jesus said today salvation has come to this house. What was he referring to? He was referring to himself. Salvation in himself had come to Zacchaeus' house. And then we get to the story of Jesus arriving in these chapters. We get to the story of Jesus arriving in Jerusalem. And we've talked about how it would be if we were writing the story, right? If we were writing the story, there would have been a throne room involved. Mary would have been surrounded by helpers. She would have been in a palace. The king is being born. That's not how the story is. That's not how it transpired at all. Jesus is born very humbly, and his beginnings are very humble. And then when we see, and then it is time to announce his birth, if we were writing the story, there are trumpets involved, there's big banners and lots of fanfare. That's not what happened at all. And now, when the king comes to Jerusalem, when he's being revealed and he's coming to Jerusalem, if I'm writing that story, he's on a war horse. He's on a big old war horse, and he's got armor on, and you can picture it, right? And this horse is massive, and it's demanding people's attention, but he doesn't. This is our humble king, and he's coming into town riding on the colt of a donkey. He's fulfilling prophecy, but we see him in humility entering in, and the people around him are calling Hosanna. They're recognizing that the Messiah has come, that a king is come, and they're putting their clothes in the path, and they're putting palm fronds down in his path. It doesn't last very long, because I totally misunderstood what was going on. They wanted a political deliverer. They wanted a national hero. They wanted a conquering king. But Jesus came for something deeper. He came to target sin. He came to bring salvation and ultimately restoration to a relationship with his Father. And then Luke gives us something unique. And he tells us that as Jesus looks around the city, he weeps, he cries, We've heard him weep at his friend's tomb before Lazarus came back to life, and he's weeping again here again. As the crowd is celebrating, he's weeping. Why? Because they welcomed him with praise, but not with surrender. They welcomed him with their lips, but not with their hearts of humility. They saw a king, but missed his kingdom. Everything starts to come into focus. The Samaritan shows mercy, not the religious elite. Mary sits, Martha strives. The tax collector is justified, but not the Pharisee. The prodigal is restored, not the self-righteous brother. Zacchaeus is transformed, not the crowd. This is upside down. The king arrives and is rejected. This kingdom is confronting our expectations and is backwards to what we expect. We want control over everything, don't we? We want control over. I listened to a man tell his testimony yesterday, and I was just sitting on the edge of my seat as he wanted control over every aspect of his life until he surrendered himself. And like Job, he lost everything. But then after he surrendered, it was the best place to be for him because his life started coming back on track. We want comfort. Jesus calls us to transformation. We want a king who serves our agenda, but Jesus is a king who demands our hearts. We must accept the right king. It's possible to praise Jesus and still misunderstand him. Think of the crowd. They shouted, Hosanna, but days later they were rejecting him. We sang this morning, I have decided to follow Jesus. And there's a third verse to that. Though none go with me, still I will follow. Though none go with me, and it's 3 times, right? Though none go with me, still I will follow. So following Jesus Jesus didn't come to call the crowd that was around Zacchaeus. He came to call Zacchaeus. He doesn't come to call, Luke mentioned last week that he didn't come to call people who think they're well, because those people who think they're well, they don't go to a doctor. It's the people that know they're unwell that go to a doctor. The ER in Woodstock isn't full of happy people playing tiddlywinks or whatever happy people do and having a grand old time. No, it's full of sick people, coughing people, people with all sorts of maladies. That's what this church is. Not this church, that sounds disparaging, but that's what church is a hospital for sick people. This is where we come and we acknowledge our dependence on God, and we acknowledge our dependence on the King, and we surrender ourselves to him. So, though none go with me, still I will follow. The crowd celebrated, Zacchaeus surrendered. Only one was transformed, though. The King changes everything. If Jesus is truly King, then our compassion changes, our priorities change, our hearts changes. Discipline is not theoretical, it's visible. Discipleship, is not theoretical, it's in what we do, it's visible. As Jesus entered Jerusalem, the question was not whether he was king, the question was, what kind of king is he? And what kind of people will receive him? The crowd laid down their branches. Will we lay down our lives in surrender to the King? He's the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. There is no other person ever worthy of our surrender. And when we surrender to him, there is such a there's so much in store for us when we surrender our lives, our finances this morning to the King, and he knows best for his kingdom. The King knows best for his kingdom. we don't always know. We think we know the best. As I was preparing this sermon today, I think I know what's best for today. The King knows. So as we've prayed in the past on past Sundays, whatever was spoken today, I prayed along that God would take whatever is of value and that would sit with you, and whatever is not, whatever is chaff would be burned away.